So guys, this video is going to be a video on, well, it's going to be a Q&A, right? Because I've had loads of questions come through my Instagram, come through my YouTube, all things property, how to get started, what do I think of certain things. And so I thought it'd just be easier for me to do a video instead of you answering people, saying the same thing to people all the time. Be easier just to have this here, and hopefully you get value from it, and hopefully I'm answering some questions that you actually have yourself, right? So the first question I have here is, what are the red flags when you're viewing a property? So if you're a beginner or you're starting out, then I'm going to name 5 or 6 things you need to look out for when you are viewing a property, right? So the first thing I would do, stand outside the property, check the roof. Check to see if the roof is bowing, if there's any slipped tiles or is any tiles missing, because this means that water's going to be getting into the property, right? It may not be coming all the way through the property, but your attic may be soaking, and it may mean that you have to replace the roof or replace trusses or joists, depending on how bad it is. So going into the attic, checking this out first is obviously a must. And when you're looking at the roof from the inside, try and see if there's any, if you can see straight through. Because if there is, obviously you've got an issue. You're going to need to repair it or potentially change the roof. Second is, well, again, when you're outside the property, look at the property and see if there's any cracking or any movement or subsidence, because this can be costly and you're going to obviously have to fix it if you're going to buy the property, right? If there's issues on the outside, as in this big cracking on the property, then this typically means that there's going to be problems on the inside. So when you go on the inside, again, same thing, look for structural stuff, look for cracking within the property, look for if the floor is all uneven. This may mean that you may have some rotten joists, or it may just be the way that the road runs, right? But you want to make sure of them 2 things as well, making sure that the property is structurally sound. Another thing to look out for, the third thing, would be water ingress. So is there any water getting in the property? As I mentioned earlier, if you've got some cracking on the outside, this may mean that you're going to have some water coming through, penetrating inside the property too. Are the windows new, or are they all sealed properly? Do they need to be changed? Because you may have water coming in through the windows because they're not sealed properly. Are the fascias or the gutters all full of mud? Because this again may mean that water isn't flowing off the property properly. It's sitting in the gutter and running down the walls. So this again may mean it's coming in. Another thing to look out for is obviously the electrics. Are the sockets really low on the floor, or are they on the skirting boards? This typically means you're going to need to have to have a rewire. Again, when you're looking at the electrics, what's the fuse board like? Does that look really old? Does that need changing? When was it last serviced? Same situation with the plumbing. What's the boiler like? Is there central heat in there? Are the radiators single skin radiators? You're typically going to need to, depending on the TRV in the room, you're going to need to have double radiators. So again, they are probably the main things that I would look out for. And obviously, are the windows going to need changing because it's not sealed properly? That's obviously something you need to look at as well. But they are the main things that I would look out for if you're a beginner looking to view a property. Second is, are house prices going down? So I get asked this quite a lot, right? Is it a good time to get started in property now? And the question or the answer that I always give is, when your grandparents bought a property in 1971, what is the value of that property now? And they'll always come back and say, well, my grandparents didn't buy a property. Or some will say, well, they bought a property for £3,000 and it's now worth £350,000. Well, I'll say, well, there is your answer. Because if you're worrying about timing the market, buying property at the right time, then you're typically going to be waiting for years, because there's never a right time to buy. You always win in the long run when you buy property. Doesn't matter what the interest rate is, as long as you're buying property and you're holding property, you're going to win in the long term. The next question is, how does an estate agent get paid? So estate agents get paid two ways. Well, one way, but there's two ways. Obviously, if you're a buyer and you're buying at auction, the auction house or the auction agent is going to be paid by you, because the buyer pays the agent's fees, or the buyer's premium is called. So the buyer will pay the estate agent at the auctions, but if you're just a normal person selling a property with an estate agent, you as the seller will then pay a £500 fee, or you'll pay anything of up to 2% on the purchase price. So that will come off when you sell the property. So if you're buying a normal house, not an auction property, you won't pay any estate agent fees. The seller pays the fees when they market it with the estate agent. The next question I have here, or number 4, should I buy a home to live in or an investment property? This is a question I get asked a lot, and I completely get why people buy their own house to live in. I mean, I've done it myself, but if you're someone that isn't really looking to get into business, or you have a good job at the moment, a well-paying job, or you're someone that, doesn't really want to have a business, then I would say to buy your own property, but to live in, because this is kind of the safest bet you're going to have in regards to investing. Now, listen, the S&P 500 and all that sort of stuff is great, but if you can buy your own investment property, your own house to live in, then I know you're not going to be getting paid from it, but you're going to be getting paid with equity every year that you keep that property. And if you keep that property for 10, 15 years, you're going to have 150 or 200 grand, equity in it. So you can use that however you want to use it. If you are someone that is currently renting and you have cash to invest, then I would typically say to use that money to buy property, because owning your own asset or your own house where you live isn't a massive thing that you need to have. But if you are someone that wants to get into business or has a business and wants to use the cash that you have effectively to start earning income, then yeah, I would then use your money to buy investment properties, because you're going to be getting paid with cash flow and obviously capital appreciation. Yeah. Or you can obviously use that cash to then flip properties to bring 30, 40, 50,000 pound in on top of what you're earning at the moment. Or is the money that you're going to use going to replace your income? So that's a few things to think of. If you're not very business savvy and you have a good paying job and you're happy to just kind of have a good life and own where you live, perfect. If you're someone that is a little bit more wants to get a better return from your cash, then I would typically say stay in rental accommodation, and then use that cash to buy investment properties, definitely. But again, there's no right or no wrong in my opinion. So yeah, that's kind of that question locked off. Number 5 is, what strategy shall I use or do with £35,000? 35k is an awkward number, right? Because to buy a buy-to-let, you could buy a buy-to-let property. Obviously, when you buy a buy-to-let property, that's typically going to sink a lot of your money into that deposit. So you're not going to be able to get that money out. So you're going to basically not lose that money, but it's going to be in a property, great capital appreciation and cash flow, but the return isn't going to be awesome, right? I would typically say, depending on what you're doing at the moment, I would get educated and understand, how to raise finance as well. Because if you think that everyone in property now is using their own cash to buy properties, then you'll understand that not everyone uses their own cash to buy. They raise finance from investors. Now, can anyone do this off learning and understanding nothing? Obviously not, because if someone's going to come to you and say, right, I want to give you £100,000, then how do you actually even know how to go and do it correctly, safely? What security you're going to give to the investor, and how are you actually going to invest that money properly? So if you are looking to raise finance, you need to actually understand how everything works in property too. So with 35k, I would just say get educated and understand whether you're looking to build a cash flow business or not. And the other option would be buy a buy-to-let property and obviously forget about it. And in 5 years' time, when you get to refinance it, you're going to have some equity. So they are the two options: education and understand how to make more on that 35k via rent-to-rent, deal sourcing, or raising finance. And the next option would be buy a buy-to-let property. Number 6, I have £200,000 equity. What shall I do with it? Leave my property mortgage free or use the money to invest. I currently work a 9 to 5 in Admiral. So I guess if you've got equity in your property, it all depends on what you're looking to do, right? Whether you're actually trying to leave your job, because if you're earning £40,000 or £50,000 a year, then of course you could use that equity to buy a property, do up and obviously sell. Or if you wanted to build a portfolio, you could use the buy, refurbish, refinance model. Now, this all depends on actually what you're trying to achieve, right? You know, you could leave your property mortgage free and not have to pay the mortgage every month, and then you could go on holiday and use that money for the mortgage to go on holiday. Or, you know, you could use that equity to really start building wealth and you know, inevitably leave something behind for your family. So, and obviously leave your job if that is something you want to do. So having 200k equity, you're in a really, really strong spot if you know how to go and invest it properly. And again, you know, as I mentioned, what are you currently earning in Admiral working 9 to 5? 30, 40, 50, 60,000 pound a year. If you could do 2 flips and make 60,000 pound, but all your time is yours, then, you know, that's something to think of as well. But again, to answer your question, it's entirely up to you what you want to actually go and do with that equity. You could use it to get more, or you could, you know, continue living and working where you are at the moment. Nothing wrong with that, obviously. I want to get into property, but this is the next question. I want to get into property, but tenants will ruin the house. Yeah, don't get me wrong. There's going to be tenants that are not perfect, but you know, all my tenants are excellent and been brilliant for me. But I guess this is where you have to be vigilant on who you actually let, you know, rent your property out. Make sure they have a proper credit check. They have references from other landlords, and you know kind of that they're earning the right amount of money to pay the rent. Because one thing that I've always done when I'm finding a tenant for a single let is I would just get an estate agency or a letting agent just to find me a tenant. They do all the credit checks, all the referencing. They'll understand and know where they work, how much they earn. So everything is done properly with a letting agent. Now, obviously, you could do this on your own, but I would rather pay a letting agent £300 for them to find me a tenant, and then me carry on with managing the property from there. Unless you wanted to obviously hand the property to a letting agent, they'll deal with everything. But if you're someone that's looking to get into property, but you're scared of what tenants are going to do to properties, not all tenants are bad. 99.9% of tenants are excellent. But you know, you may have the 0.0% or 1% that are bad. But if that's going to stop you from, you know, building wealth in property and worrying and just trying to build your own life just because you're thinking about a tenant back end, then, you know, you're never really going to get started. So don't worry about tenants. Worry about getting to the place where you're going to have to actually put tenants in, and then, you know, there are ways and means that you can do to mitigate them issues. Number 8, what's the actual process of buying, refurbing, refinancing and renting out a property? So this is obviously called the buy, refurbish, refinance strategy. This is where you're going to buy a rundown property or a property that needs a new kitchen, a new bathroom. It needs updating. You're then going to obviously do the renovation. You're going to add a new kitchen, add a new bathroom, do an extension on the property, double extension, loft conversion. Depending on what you want to do with the property, you're going to do the renovation. You're then going to push the value up, and then you're going to refinance at the higher value. So you're typically going to have to buy these properties with cash or with bridging. Bridging finance is obviously short-term lending. You'll refurb the property, then you'll refinance it at a higher value. You'll then refinance it and have your capital back. Not all, depending on obviously the deal. You'll have a new mortgage on the property, is inevitably your cash back to you, and then you can rent the property out. Obviously, I've got more videos on this on the channel, guys. So yeah, make sure to check them out. I've actually only got 9 questions. So yeah, number 9. I can't afford to buy in London. Obviously this guy lives in London, or girl. I can't afford to buy in London. Shall I buy up north or south? I guess depending on how much cash you actually have to invest, you can obviously buy some cheap properties up north and get some really good deals. And the same down south, obviously, for instance, in South Wales, where I'm based, you can get great deals down here too. I guess if you are someone with equity or cash and you don't actually have the time to go and do it, I would just make sure that you're working with a trusted deal sourcer, or you're working with someone that can really help you and they have past testimonials and reviews to say, yes, you know, these guys are actually serious. So there's loads of people that I've worked with from London that haven't got the time to actually go and invest their capital. And so we'll find them a deal, I'll project manage the renovation, and then they'll either refinance or sell the property. So working with a trusted sourcer is obviously key and something that will help you in the long run. So yeah, I hope you had and got value from this video, guys. I will be doing more videos like this, so hopefully you get value, and I shall see you in the next one. Make sure to like and subscribe because a lot of you are not doing it.